May 28, 1976. Mr. Randolph, could you tell me, first of all, how you became interested in the theater?
Well, first of all, I have to correct you. You said his home. It's just one of the apartment here in Hollywood is only part of it. I also live in New York because I don't want to give up my roots, where I think that the basic work is done as an actor.
Correction then, as one of his homes.
And, no, you remember we were talking before the interview about the how you get started in this business, and the interesting thing is that I was going to college at CCNY, and I had no idea that what I would do. I was a sociology major and economics major and all the rest of that jazz, and my kid brother is the one who thought that I should be an actor. I had never seen a Broadway show while I was going. I was too poor. We were on home relief for a time. I had to work for the government for 50 cents an hour to go through college. And so I had never seen a play. But my brother, for some reason or other, who was younger than me and who was interested in chemistry and all the rest of it, had given me a book on my 18th birthday of anthology of Shakespeare's, all of Shakespeare's plays. And to the greatest actor that may or will be, signed Jerry. And I realized now I saw that book only about a year ago. And I couldn't believe it because
You've forgotten it.
I've forgotten all about it. But I was 18 years old at the time, so he must have thought I had some talent. Anyway, he was the one who set up an appointment with a man by the name of Charles Martin, who was broadcasting on WMCA and was a dramatic director of a program called Five Star Final. And he wrote it and he directed it. And he and Sam Levine, who was then a star, of the Milky Way on Broadway, and whom I didn't know, decided to scour the city of New York for talent. They were going to get it from the streets, from the sidewalks of New York, and they advertised that they were having auditions. And my kid brother was the one who called up, made an appointment for me. And like I described this terribly dramatic scene, I wasn't even nervous. I do figure that I realize now that if I had not been interested in the theater, then I probably would not have gone down. I probably said, no, Jerry, I'm interested in sociology and economics and philosophy. And obviously, I was bored with all that. I don't know why I did it, but I went down there and I was not afraid. And when they called me in and began to be very dramatic and said, "Won't you sit down?" I said, "I certainly will." I think, well, what the hell? They use that technique. Well, I'll answer back. So I was very relaxed, and they gave me a gangster roll to read, and I didn't even bother asking them to look it over. I read it off the cuff, and I was like Paul Muni and Scarface, and I must have impressed them because I saw them shaking their heads and then asking me if I'd ever wanted to be in the theater before, and I went through this whole thing ever since I was a kid. I wanted to be in the theater. My mother was Romanian gypsy, which was a lie. And that part I didn't tell you. And some part of your archives are going to be all the lies that actors tell. But I must have just had that kind of imagination without realizing it. And then I was accepted. And once I got accepted and went to classes 3 nights a week while I was going to college in the daytime and meeting other actors and the vitality, the interest in life on every facet. And I was always interested in psychology, so the study of human behavior and excited me. We read Stanislavski and we took tests, and I always got 100% on the tests, and I guess I must have absorbed deeply all of this information, and I won 2 tickets because I got the highest mark on a test to see my first Broadway play, was one with Helen Hayes. And Maxwell Anderson, I think it was a writer of it, Elizabeth the Queen, I think it was called. And I then felt that was very exciting. And I think that really set me. And then I met a woman in the class who was a very talented young lady whose father was a dramatic director. And we formed a little group called the Ibsen Theater, and we met up in the Bronx and rehearsed every night. I just found it the most exciting kind of thing. And then once I got into that, and that led me into the Federal Theater, incidentally.
Okay, well.
It's very interesting that I recruited other people. We formed this group called the Ibsen Theater. We took over a burlesque house, a Minsky burlesque house, down on 2nd Avenue and Houston Street. It was called the Rooftop Theater. And later on, it was adopted by Piscata and the Dramatic Workshop. But we went in there and had these long runways for the burlesque, for the, you know, the kind where they go out into the audience and do their strip there and then go back. Well, we went in that place, and it obviously had been raided. You see, it was an empty theater during the Depression days. And it had this phony blue ceiling with the stars and the white stars and signs, Mademoiselle Pumpernickel from Brooklyn, and 32 smiling, snappy sweeties, and all of that kind of corny stuff, and terrible jokes, burlesque jokes that were scattered all over the place. And so we took it over, and we built this theater, called it the Ibsen Theater. We got rid of the runways. We did it all by ourselves. And it was a kind of basic learning, and then we ended up doing A Doll's House and Ghosts by Ibsen, charging a quarter admission, and it was near the Bowery, you see. And that was because we charged admission and because there were programs with my name in it. At that time, my name was Mortimer Lippman, and it wasn't until later that I changed my name to John Randolph, and that's an interesting story, and even if we don't put it in the archives, I'll tell you about it. But that was the sufficient evidence that you were an actor, that enabled me to get, later on, to get into the Federal Theater. Because I went into there, from there, when that failed, I went into the Theater Collective. I auditioned for them. And then I got to know everybody in the Left Wing Theater. But at that time, being in 2 theater groups was sufficient to prove that I was at least an actor. And I've been asked, what are the qualifications, or what would you do today, now that you're in the union? You were an executive in Actors Equity Council, a member of the council, a member of the Board of Directors of Screen Actors Guild today. Would you insist, as Equity did in those days, I think they wanted only professional actors who were members of Equity to be on the project. And there was a big fight at that time that amateurs were being allowed in. Well, I think that I would have to remember those days and not exclude people who have worked in regional theater or who worked in so-called neighborhood theater or theater in an area that was not an equity company, but where the actors had a lot of experience. If they really wanted to work as actors and make that their life's work, and they had to have other jobs to keep alive, I would think that if they performed, let's say, 4 shows in the regional area, that would qualify them, something like that. I have never thought about it. And I'm sure I would be considered a traitor now, you know. The union would accept, no, you've got to accept that it must be professional.
Well, how specifically did you get into the Federal Theater? Were you on relief? And
Yeah, my family was on. My father lost his business as a furrier. He had a big business. Was my stepfather, so. And he just disappeared, like a lot of men did in those days of the Depression. So my mother was left with my brother and myself, and she supported us by playing cards 2 nights a week, or 2 afternoons a week. The ladies would meet in her house, and she charged like $8 to set up for food and coffee and fruits and cake, and then she would play, and she was a good card player.
And that's how she would make.
And she kept us alive that way while we were looking for my father, who disappeared. He lost his business. The gangsters were after him. He'd borrowed money, and then he took a job selling soda on a truck, and that failed, and then he just disappeared. And we went on home relief, and my mother would augment the income that way. And once the Federal Theater project started, because all that time I was not earning any money. I mean, I was working in all this free theater. But it was exciting background, important, and I met a lot of very famous people who are famous today. And I applied when the project started. And as a matter of fact, if you speak to Hallie Jonas downstairs, she was one of the first on the project. She'd probably even give you more definite information. But to me, it was the most exciting thing. I went up for the interview. I brought the programs. I heard about it because the people in the Theater Collective and the Theater of Action were approached, as I understand it, by the project because they wanted groups that were already functioning, and they were very good in one-act plays, and they became, I think, part of what we call the one-act play theater. And of course, they were all living in collectives, And whatever money they got for doing their left-wing plays, they or on the picket line or wherever they worked, Earl Robinson and a lot of very famous people, they got on the project. And I didn't have any background with them. I had just kind of joined in, just gotten to them, so that when I heard that they were doing that, I applied too. And I don't know how I got into the children's theater, but we were assigned different groups. I think we were assigned automatically. You probably know more about it than I do from your research.
I guess it was an automatic.
You met somebody who interviewed you, and then I was just assigned to a children's theater.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing that I found that, I had no fears. It was all exciting to me to be able to get paid $23.86 a week to get your family off home relief, and I was able to support my family on that $23.86 a week.
Amazing.
And to do work that you were interested in, and to do it consistently, and even though it was chaos in the beginning, because 4 hours a day were all you were allowed to rehearse, that was set, I think, by the unions, try to make some kind of union arrangement, and the qualifications set up, and suddenly we were with actors who were older actors and experienced, and here I was a young man. But what is interesting from my point of view, and I don't know if you've gotten many of the oral interviews, is I was one of the youngest people there. And I had no unemployment and depression were part of my life. It was what I was brought up with. So I never thought there was anything different. I didn't even know whether anybody would ever make any money during the Depression. It's only now that I'm mature and have been able to earn a good living during the time when America has been through a very rough period, I realize there are people who live well. But at that time I was very naive.
So you weren't really depressed?
No, I wasn't depressed at all. I was very excited, and what was stunning to me was to really hear actors say, well, I'm only here temporarily. They wanted me very much for this, one of the roles here, and probably won't be here very long.
So you're moving on.
They were there for a long time. They were there for 2 years. It was a shame of unemployment and of long periods of unemployment. Shame of being on home relief and not letting anybody know. Now, I knew they were all on home relief, so they must have been in bad shape, but it was like the show just closed yesterday, and I thought I would drop in and do this for a while, and all of the bullshit that where people cover up their fears and their panic at being unemployed for a long period. And so I was very aware of that. That really interested me. And I think it was more objective than subjective. And then, of course, there were all sorts of fights in getting it organized and the problems, and they used one script called Around the World in 80 Days, which is one of the first that I remember that we were going to do, and there were hundreds of actors. And you had a director, and had to have a producer, and, they were trying to set it up like a theater group, and get rehearsal space, and do it all in 4 hours a day, and, but I don't think they expected anything to happen in the project. I think that they just set them all up and figured, what the hell, we'll put some money in circulation, and we'll get people working again. And,
So you didn't think you...
No, they didn't think that. I'm convinced that there was absolutely no idea, any ideological guidance or direction, because it was new in America. Nobody ever done it before. And just that you cannot bring actors, writers, directors, producers, scenic designers together without them creating something. And I think it was the tremendous creativity that was latent, that hadn't been used, that getting together, and there was mediocrity, and there were people who shouldn't have been on the project, but who were hungry, and they deserved to be fed like other human beings. And there may have been people who screwed off, but basically there was very little of that. There was, if anything, people resented not being used completely, you see, because there were so many people to be used. And I found that when you put together people with every background, there were old actors with old techniques, and there were young actors with revolutionary techniques, the Stanislavski method, and there were guys from Broadway who couldn't care less about either, you know. And so bringing all that together was very difficult. You understand, nobody realized that when you brought together people of every race, every religious group, every ethnic group, aside from the blacks, Negroes who were not allowed, did not work with us. It's very interesting that they had their own theater, and there were times that there was integration in the theater, but it was with a part call for it. But there was no real attempt to integrate. I don't even remember whether we even had one black actor in the children's theater, in both of the children's theaters. It's very interesting. I hadn't even thought about it until this very second.
Well, the Beavers had Mr. Owl, who was black. Remember?
Mr. Owl.
Yeah.
Hoot Owl. Hoot Owl. He was like Amos Nandy. That's
Oh,
right.
is that what that was?
He did a hoot Owl. Yeah, so it was, again, I've never even thought about that. But I remember now that it was, he was the only one. He was a
And he
tall,
was brought in.
brought in. He was not a regular member of the Children's Theater. But I think that the Federal Theater, if I can just digress for a second, by bringing together all of these tremendous immigrant groupings that came to this country and didn't bring any fixed form of what the theater should be, what the dance should be, what artistic expression should be, because there was no real precedent that we know of. Not like England with its national theater and Germany with its kind of theater. So everything was organized and had a background and a discipline. Out of it came this enormously inventive group of creativities. And I was stunned by while I was in the middle of the Federal Theater, of the classic theater. So then incidentally, we were trying at one time to work out a way of going from one group to another, because after it got set up, if you didn't want to stay in the Children's Theater and you'd like to try something else, was there a way of moving into other groups? Because there was the Mercury Theater, and there was the one-act play theater, and there was the Suitcase Theater, and there was the Living Newspaper, and I mean, everything was so exciting. So that there was this was one of the exciting and I think eye-opening experiences that make me feel that today a national theater would be an extraordinary thing for us to have in this country. We could still do an enormous job. And the other thing that occurred on the Federal Theater, I think, was a great political awakening. Being with other actors, being with politically aware people in some cases, being aware of union-conscious people, aware of injustice, aware of other people's problems, that a society had so disintegrated in America as to leave 17 million unemployed, with all of these people with talent and ability unable to function as human beings, with families broken up, sharing those experiences, opened me up politically. Now, I must have been terribly emotional. I always thought of myself as a very cool cat. But I don't think so, no. I think I was very emotional. I became the editor of a newspaper, and I'll never forget one incident that remained seared in my brain. We had organized the City Projects Council, which was the white-collar workers. It was a kind of a union of white-collar workers. Unheard of that the government gave you $23.86 a week and then you started a union, you see. But there were a lot of abuses on the project. And one of them was the giving of pink slips, so that you would be rehearsing a play for 8 months and you have it ready to go, and then suddenly, because Congress would cut a certain amount of people out, no reasoning behind it all, and pink slips would be handed out indiscriminately to sometimes leading men or leading women, and you'd have to redo the whole play. We weren't like machines that you could replace one worker immediately with another on the assembly line. They learn how to tap that screw the right way or whatever it was. So the problem was, how do you fight against that? And then I myself led many delegations down in Washington as a young man to the senators to fight for for appropriations to keep the project going, to see Hallie Flanagan, and she was a wonderfully sympathetic woman because we didn't understand the problem she had. But fighting desperately to keep your theater group alive, you see, so it wouldn't be torn to pieces by this handing out of pink slips. And I remember that there was a tremendous demonstration. We had word from the inside that there was going to be large layoffs. Thousands and thousands of people were going to be kicked off the project.
And was that around Christmas in 37?
Somewhere around that time. You probably know more. All I remember is that as the editor of the Raw newspaper, we asked everybody to go out on strike for one day. We felt if everybody went out on strike for one day and picketed the project offices, that it might shake them up enough not to fire so many people. Now, I had never been a picket line. That's the kind of union organizer I was, and the kind of leader I was. I was a nice Jewish boy. No, I was involved mostly with the children's theater. I helped organize that group. And I was so ashamed to be picketing because my mother had always told me that a nice Jewish boy doesn't hand out leaflets and things like that. You got to be nice. And I remember trying to hide. I was about 6'1". You know, I don't know. I was leading my delegation, but I was no good. Anyway, I did it though. I picketed with about 23,000 people around that project building, and some of the people in children's theater did not picket. They didn't have to. You know, there's no law that said they had to, but not in my day. Either were with us or against us. And a man committed suicide who was a WPA worker who got a pink slip. As they went out and handed out those slips anyway, maybe not as many as they originally intended, but they handed them out. And I got terribly disturbed, and I wrote on the small newspaper that the people in the children's theater who did not picket were part of all of those people who did not show up, so that we didn't have 100% of the demonstration, and that man's suicide is on their heads. Well, that was so bad. It was in such bad taste. But I was very upset that the man committed suicide. And immediately nobody talked to me. Now, from being one of the leaders, I committed a terrible sin. I had made a mistake, and only one woman talked to me, and she was a wonderful woman who was married to Sam Bonnell, who was in the Children's Theater at the time. A woman named Isabel Bonner, and a woman who was more mature than most anybody there on the project, and not a very pretty-looking woman, kind of old and lined face, but a wonderful, warm human being. And she was the only one who sat down and explained to me that it wasn't any individual's fault. The system was at fault, that you did the best they can. You cannot say to people, you've got to do something. If you think it's right, you have a right to think it's right. It was the first time a human being saw me through a crisis situation, because I was too young to understand what to do about it. And she helped me, and I apologized and everything. And that was a learning experience. But from that point on, I was able to then go into different groups. That's where of course, in the children's theater, I was in the Emperor's New Clothes, and I was in Revolt of the Beavers when they had this terrible, I'll never forget that this terrible fight over the contents of this, that we were trying to preach revolution to the kids because the Boy Scout Troop 237 in the Bronx had wanted us to be investigated as un-American. And it may not have been the best script in the world, but it was an interesting script, and it was an attempt to do a different kind of children's play, and it was very, very colorful. And that was exciting, because there you made up yourself. We did animal makeups. And
did you make up your own?
Yes, you make your own self up, and studied beavers, and I played a tough,
That's your name.
Tough and gruff, tough, one of the beavers. And it was just the kind of excitement that existed, and I was trying to think before you came over of what it was that was so enormously stimulating about the project. And I think one of the things was, that you had a job for a couple of years. You knew where you were. And money wasn't the only thing. It was the association with this extraordinary creative society that you were involved with. And this reaching out to people who never saw plays before. Why, the Children's Theater did park shows long before Joe Papp ever did them. I mean, we invented the caravans where you put the side of your truck down. It was a stage. And we had rough tents that flapped out from the top for dressing room tables, but we played parks all over the city of New York to 25,000 people. I thought it was the most extraordinary, exciting interaction between audience and actor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you ever saw Julie Dassin, who is a famous director now, and Sam Bennell out there playing as Tsar and Zan, I think it was, looking for the emperor and looking for this town and mingling with the kids in the park and throwing a baseball around and why the noise and the taking sides with the evil guy, I mean against the evil guys and with the good people, and it was the most extraordinary kind of theater. I mean, that's theater. That was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That was communication. That was reaching out to other people. And because I was so young, it was all taken for granted that that's the way theater should be.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I've never given up the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how long it is. What, 36? It's 30 years, 40 years
40 years
ago. I'm 60 now. I'm going on 61, and I still am fired up by the dream of the National Theater. I've never given up the fight, and have stimulated the fight in equity and on this particular thing from the very beginning. Never, ever given up this fight to have something like the National Theater again. And then I remember meeting Bella Abzug only recently. We were talking about an appropriation, how to get an appropriation for the actors, not just the humanities and the National Foundation, but also a special grant like you do to build houses and to get the construction industry started. What do we do with all of this enormous talent that is unemployed in this country, where we know that people would love to see theater? For example, let me tell you another interesting experience. I got away from the children's theater for a minute. Am I talking too much?
No.
If you interrupt me if you feel that there's something. Because I sometimes jump around so fast that I don't know whether I leave you confused. But
No, you don't.
when I talk about the reaching out into people, the things that were stimulating about the project, even if it was doing it can't happen here by Sinclair Lewis in I think 26 cities all across the country simultaneously with a cast of 60 actors, or whether it was a Negro theater in Seattle or down in Dallas, or it was just going out where there wasn't theater before, or on a scale that was unheard of in America. And I did something that was very interesting. I was farmed out to play the lead up in Maine in a show with a stock company in Maine.
Was this during Federal Theater?
During the Federal Theater days.
I think
And this is one of the things that I had never left the Bronx, for example. So to go up to Maine, to be in a Federal Theater program they call Surefire, is the name of it.
Surefire.
So all of this is coming back now.
Yeah, I didn't know you were in it.
And we had a tour Maine. Now, when you tour a place that has not had a stock company for 15 years, where the theater had died out, but there used to be theater there, and the project brought out people who had given up the theater because they couldn't make a living out of it, and there were vaudevillians in this project, and there were trick violinists, and there were jugglers, and there were some actors, and tap dancers, and all these people were kind of recruited by the Federal Theater just to put people to work. And Surefire was the first play that they were going to do, and they needed a leading man. And I was recruited at that time. And I forget how we worked it, but I was kind of transferred alone to that project. And I wanted to go out of town. I'd never been out of New York. I'd never seen anything but the Bronx. And I remember we played, in the beginning, when we played a place that had not seen a show for a long time, like we played a gymnasium, because there was no theater available. And people would come. At the end of the first act, they left. And so we had a second and a third act, and there were no people. They didn't know that they had to come back, that they thought that was the whole play. So then we learned how to put an act in between. In other words, the first act would come down, and the trick violinists would come on stage and do tricks.
Yeah, until the second act.
Until the second act was ready to go. Then after the second act, a juggler came on, or a tap dancer. And then we did the third act. So they stayed all during that time, see. And I'll bet you nobody else has told you this.
No.
That was one interesting experience. That was another world for me. Then I remember, then I was farmed out to, and this was the last show I did on Federal Theater.